Let's kick us off. Welcome, everyone, to the Urbanism Next Center's Urban Air Mobility Goals and Planning webinar, where we're tackling where urban air mobility is headed and what does it mean for cities. My name is Anne Brown. I'm the Research Director for the Urbanism Next Center. We focus on technology in cities and the many ripple effects that technology may have on our cities, from land use to real estate to equity in the environment. So today we are delighted to be talking about urban air mobility. And again, these big overarching questions. So before I dive into the meat of today's webinar, I do want to take a moment just to do some shameless plugging for upcoming webinars for the remainder of the year. In April, we'll be talking about best practices for shared micromobility parking. And later in the year, we'll have webinars on sustainable urban design, curb management and action, and thinking about public mobility. So please check out our website to either stay tuned for those forthcoming dates and register online. And thanks for joining us today, again, to talk about urban air mobility goals and planning. So quick framing from me before I hand it off to our guests for today. When we talk about urban air mobility, we're largely thinking about two different types of services. That's a passenger side, where we're thinking about flying people across cities. And then the other side of that is delivery. And so these have some similarities in the form, function, the regulations, or the questions about scaling, but they're also quite distinct, right? So you can see even in these pictures, right, these are not the same vehicles, and there are these ripple effects in the different implications for our cities. When we think about urban air mobility, one of the big questions that we at Urbanism Next tackled in our most recent report, which I will drop in the chat in a bit, is how does urban air mobility align with city goals? So thinking about, can it minimize urban environmental impacts? Can it help us reduce traffic congestion, ensure equitable access, increase access to destinations or goods, minimize noise pollution, maintain personal data privacy, and improve or increase safe transportation options? So there's a lot of goals that are advertised with urban air mobility, and our questions today and in this report were really how can urban air mobility realize those goals? So we have a lot to tackle in our hour together, but we'll be thinking about the scale of impacts, the potential inequities, some of the key concerns around urban air mobility, and thinking about cities' plans for moving forward in this ever-changing landscape. I am delighted to introduce our two speakers and guests for today. We have Gabriela Juarez, who's a city planner with the City of Los Angeles, and then Matt Day, who's a technology reporter at Bloomberg News. So Gabriela is the urban air mobility lead for the City of Los Angeles and analyzes opportunities and issues of new mobility and urban air mobility for the City of Los Angeles. She has over 20 years of experience working across a range of planning issues and has a Master of Arts in Urban Planning from UCLA. Matt has years of experience in both investigative and business journalism. He's currently covering Microsoft and Amazon from his base in Seattle, including urban air mobility and its evolution. His reporting has provided insights into corporate strategy, innovation, market dynamics, and prior to Bloomberg, he wrote for the Seattle Times, Wall Street Journal, and Dow Jones. And I'm really excited to have both of these speakers here with us because they come with these two different perspectives on urban air mobility, really the city and policy side, and then the technology and the ins and outs of that other side of urban air mobility. So quick run of show for everyone. I'm going to be turning over to Gabriela to present and share some materials and insights. Then we'll pass it off to Matt and wrap it up then with some Q&A from you all. So if at any point you do have a question you want to ask, please do put it in the Q&A, and we will get to that after both Gabriela and Matt share their insights. So Gabriela, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you for a generous invitation to share today on the panel. I'm excited to share out kind of the work program that we've put together, or more specifically, just kind of our background gathering of our information session we've been doing over the last several years, trying to understand what this new mode of transportation is. It's been an interesting road in that we didn't know or understand what this was, but what we did learn from past experiences regarding new and advanced technology is that it does behoove us as a city to understand what the technology and what the intent of the new services could provide and how to integrate how they could be integrated into a city. Specifically, we learned a hard lesson from scooters, and it was something that was a missed opportunity, I think, for our city to really come to the table and listen to what their vision was and how we should take the opportunity to create a framework ahead of their operational launching schedules and plans. So thinking about policy as a city when we're talking about urban air mobility or advanced air mobility, it really forces us to come together in a space that is a little uncomfortable for land use planners, transportation planners, and aviation planners because we all generally operate parallel next to each other. We don't normally operate in the same space. And so that's a little graphic that I found here of 3D chess. It's the best analogy, I think, that kind of plays to what is the new landscape of this new mode of transportation, and that it forces the three of us to come together and work across our systems and planning, paths to be able to create a cohesive network and system can be communicated across operationally for all three spaces. I think it's a really large lift in that just trying to get through one of our spaces poses significant challenges in and of itself. So it is kind of a testament to how innovative this technology will be and is for us. So that does pose a number of policy concerns and considerations and really areas of understanding that a jurisdiction would have to be able to fully comprehend and have sufficient information to be able to figure out where and how it can operate. And so for the city of Los Angeles, when we've been approached with proposals or just introductions of this new opportunity of transportation, one of the first things that we do ask is, what problem are you solving for the city, for our city specifically, right? Because it's a lot of effort and resources that would have to be dedicated from taxpayer money in a budget that has to compete and balance several different priorities. And so it's really key for us to understand how you're proposing to help us resolve issues that we're grappling with. And so that's kind of like the starting point of where we approach this sort of new conversation. One of the things that has also, been the canon for our foundational understanding is really understanding FAA regulations, our state regulations with regard to aviation, and being at the table as those discussions are happening to be able to uplift the concerns that a city like Los Angeles is having to balance among other priorities, and making sure that as FAA, USDOT, Caltrans in particular for us are weighing the regulatory operations and systems, that the concerns that a city like Los Angeles would want to make sure are captured. And also thinking about a regional approach is really key, because for the city of Los Angeles in particular, we have 2 cities within our city boundary. So this is not something that we anticipate would operate just within city jurisdictions. It's obviously going to cross city jurisdictions within ourselves, but in kind of the understanding of passenger movement, it would be across several jurisdictions. And that brings up a number of needs to have a lot of collaboration. I think that whether a jurisdiction chooses to be an active participant of having vertiports, having drones, having package delivery, there are so many, unforeseeable situations that come up during a flight en route that impact other routes, right? And so it's a domino effect whereby you may not be a provider of these services in your jurisdiction, but you may be called upon in an emergency situation to provide a secure landing or some alternative place to just have housing of these vehicles due to some other issue, whether it be climate, a weather issue, it could be, explosions of who knows what kind. We've seen so many in the past few months, weeks. So having that disaster and preparedness plans that are beyond the scope of your jurisdiction are really key. So coordination across regions is really important. And so when we're invited to the table, we really try to bring as many of our fellow jurisdictions, because it's a conversation that does have to be collective. And it behooves us to be as educated and informed as possible, and helping to kind of set a good parameter of the concerns at the local level to federal and state jurisdictions, so that they understand what cities, are having to also grapple with when they're considering, the vertiport design, route decisions, and different types of operational requirements. And so it's a moving target, and that these regulations are evolving, but it also offers us as a jurisdiction an opportunity to listen to those conversations and weigh in, to be able to kind of make sure that our concerns are heard, and more importantly, being able to provide the perspective of what would be locally required to see how much can be integrated at the state or federal level. And again, kind of creating a tiered approach of honing down the regulations for operations. Thinking about a city's jurisdiction more specifically, a key concern would be about avoiding sensitive uses within our jurisdiction. So schools come to mind, our coastal areas. Many people don't know how much wildlife there is in Los Angeles, but we have a lot of mountain lions that are very active, and we're trying very hard to create a space for them to thrive. But we also have, marine life. And while that is a priority, it's about balancing the space for these operations in a way that should that be something that we consider in Los Angeles. So route is a big deal, selecting routes. Thinking about kind of balancing those considerations as well for our stakeholders and our immediate population, equity is a big factor and a big priority for the city of Los Angeles. So we all are very familiar with past decisions in both aviation, transportation, and land use planning, where missteps were taken in those decisions that ended up creating marginalized communities and having environmental impacts that we're not equally spread or exposing one population more than others. And so the equity of how we design these opportunities is really important to keep in mind and think about. Connecting our mobility options and employment centers is one of our sort of canons to preserve sustainability within the city. We've been incredibly fortunate in the last several years to have a huge investment at the federal and state level in our transit network, expanding our bus and rail services. And so we really want to take advantage of that to the degree possible, and integrate this new modality as an extension of those networks, of those transit services, as opposed to competing and replacing them. Not every city has been as fortunate as we have been, and so it would be a missed opportunity for us to negate that connectivity and really reinforce that opportunity.
Hey,
Another
Gabriela.
big,
Sorry,
yes.
can I interrupt you really quick? There's just a couple folks who are saying your voice is still cutting out. Do you mind trying to turn off your video just really quick? Let's see if it's the Wi-Fi. It will cooperate a little better with that.
Sure. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I can't see the questions with my screen sharing. I apologize. Thanks for letting me know. Hopefully that's helping. Another big consideration that from the land use perspective is really impactful is balancing our density opportunities through the city with locations of vertiports, particularly those that would be on the top of buildings, because when you locate a helicopter pad or a vertiport on a building, you're inherently limiting the building height on surrounding properties for the landing and takeoff required space. And so while that may not be as big of a deal for other cities, for a city like Los Angeles that's grappling with a lot of affordable housing and homelessness issues, creating opportunities for housing is really a big priority. And so thinking about where our height districts are and thinking about where we want to place density going forward is really part of the conversation and how we think about these opportunities for vertiport locations. I mentioned earlier our wildlife concerns, our coastal areas. The other big concern that we also share that would require additional environmental studies are vibration impacts, as well as different, more localized noise studies. We know that so far these are vehicles that will be much quieter. However, I think that while they're in flight, that's definitely the case. However, I think the landing and takeoff is really the impact that hasn't been sufficiently handled, or it's not handled, but sufficiently researched for enough understanding of different corridors, sound corridors, and impact to older downtown areas such as ours that have a lot of historic buildings. And so we would have to understand the vibration impacts and noise impacts are to different types of building typologies, so that we can understand, how that would impact those types of buildings and what we would need to do to mitigate those impacts. And just know, what that means, and the frequency of these routes, right, dictate a lot of those impacts as well. And then just kind of rounding out additional opportunities and impacts. The air quality concern is really interesting because it does seem like it would help remove some of the air concerns that we see with our various polluters that we have, but it really does depend on how much and where they're flying, right? To think about what those benefits might be. There is, to me, an opportunity to integrate a lot of equity in our city with being able to use local hire and recruitment and investment into our communities of color, low-income communities throughout the city, so that from the get-go, they're recruited and they're able to really be part of the operational structure, so that while it's possible that for the launch of this new modality, um, as you know, it may not be as affordable as other transportation modes, it doesn't exclude their benefit as a resident of the city and having the opportunity to be part of the job side of creating this new transportation network, is where we could see the social equity that our city prioritizes. So, there's a lot of pluses and minuses depending on how this goes. We could see benefiting the city, but I think there's so much to understand still, even today, that we would want to hear more about where this really kind of goes. And I think, it will be fun to explore this. As you can see, there's my dog who enjoyed sitting in the cockpit. I think that it's got a lot of potential, but I think for a city like Los Angeles, we just need to be very clear about what we know, what we don't know, and what we need to understand in order to be able to integrate this going forward. So I'll stop sharing and hand it over to Matt.
Thanks, Gabriela. All yours,
Thanks,
Matt.
Gabriela. Appreciate it, Ann. Let me see if I can share my screen. It's always a gamble. All right, so like Ann said, Matt Day here. I cover Microsoft and Amazon out of Seattle. So my apologies in advance for a very drone delivery focused spiel, but that's most of my expertise. So I wonder if we could go back in time just a little bit. 2013, big tech wasn't really big tech. Facebook was cuddlier, Google was cuddlier, right? And Amazon, America's hottest company at the time, invites CBS News out to Seattle.
To Amazon campus in Seattle, Bezos kept telling us that he did have a big surprise, something he wanted to unveil for the first time.
Let me show you something.
Oh, man. Oh, my God.
These are octocopters.
Yeah.
These are effectively drones, but there's no reason that they can't be used as delivery vehicles. Take a look up here so I can show you how it works.
All right. We're talking about delivery here.
We're talking about delivery. So there's an item going into the vehicle. I know this looks like science fiction. It's not.
Wow.
This is early. This is still years away. Drops the package.
There's the package.
You come and get your package, and we can do half-hour delivery.
Half-hour delivery.
So I share that, partly to show how far we've come. Like those devices look pretty doofy and like something you can get $50 on Amazon at this point, but also just kind of how far we have to go, because to zoom forward to the present, Amazon's got this big, beautiful drone they call the MK30 designed to deliver packages. But at present, as we wrote a couple of months back, they are not flying right now. They grounded the fleet for an update. They were only flying anyway in a couple of cities around the U.S. So still kind of a huge gap between reality and the promise of drone delivery. As some of Ann's work notes, drone delivery is maybe the first widespread drone use case through the door, right? It avoids a lot of the liability and complicated consumer issues of a air taxi service. It's something you can bolt on to existing logistics stuff. So there's a lot of reasons that makes sense. And a lot of reasons for Amazon there to be the starting gun back in 2013 saying, listen, drone delivery is the future and we're going to get up on it. They are not alone. Some of the other big outfits there, we've got these guys called Wing. They are an Alphabet company, the Google cousin. Looks a lot like a more traditional drone copter here. This one is a lot lighter than Amazon's because it is designed to deliver foodstuffs primarily, or little sundries from pharmacy partners. Here we go. There it is, dropping a package in front of your house. And a third competitor that's worth noting in the drone delivery space, folks called Zipline. These guys look a little bit different still. You notice these couple of concepts they've got flying around look a lot more like a sort of drone fixed wing aircraft hybrid, right? So a little bit of a plane look. The first edition burped these their parcels out with a parachute attached, and the current one that they're rolling out uses a tether as Wing does. Amazon just ejects the package from 10 or 15 feet up, which is a choice. And so one of the ways that these two entrants, Wing and Zipline, I can stop sharing here, hurdled Amazon, because they've done hundreds of thousands of deliveries in Wing's case, 1.4 million in Zipline's, is they did a little bit of regulatory arbitrage, right? They started making their deliveries in locales that were more favorable to drones earlier on. So that was Wing for Australia. Zipline got going in Rwanda delivering medical supplies. So just getting some reps and doing more deliveries. Amazon, for its parts, up to thousands of deliveries. But the bottom line for all these guys is it's still really early days. They are all operating under FAA authorization designed for charter jets, right? For aircraft for hire. So that means, even though their aircraft are certified and the FAA says, they're safe and can work in these limited fashions, every city, these operators, want to set up a drone delivery operation, and they got to get approved by the FAA. They got to do the associated environmental impact work. So it's not just like, saying, hey, we're an airline and turning on a new city. There's a lot more to it than that. And a lot of sort of rulemaking to go before we get there. Not to belabor, but what I'd like to leave you with from that video from back in 2013 when Jeff Bezos said the drone age is here, is I think just in the short time I've been looking at this space, there's been this wide gulf between kind of the tech industry's prognostication for when things are going to appear and when they actually do. You can just rattle them off, right? Self-driving cars were just around the corner. If you look at e-commerce, Amazon's wheelhouse rather, there were expectations for, just about everything is going online and there's no going back. A couple of years back, the sort of quick delivery 7-Eleven for rent phenomenon, outfits like GoPuff were going to be ubiquitous. Those folks ran into problems. So this is an industry that tends to promise that something is just around the corner, and then look, there's a whole lot of hard work behind it, and that's definitely some of the fits and starts that just about everybody involved in the drone business on the delivery side is seeing right now. And one final funny Amazon quirk between that 2013, hey, we're going to deliver with drones announcement, and today they built UPS, right? So their dream might have been, at one point to have drone delivery live some years ago. But in the meantime, they went out and they built, a fleet that does traditional logistics things, right? Those blue Prime vans in your neighborhood and mine. They built an Air Force, a cargo fleet about as big as UPS's. They've got hundreds of warehouses in every city around the U.S. doing last mile delivery. So even though kind of, aspirationally they want to be, they want to chase this shiny new technology, in the meantime, they went in a very, very traditional route and said, hey, listen, it's going to be more effective for the near future for us to deliver things the old-fashioned way out of the bed of a truck. So we're still waiting for our drone delivery, but they still say it's around the corner. Back to you, Ann.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks to both you and Gabriela. We're going to move into the Q&A part. I will give myself the first Q&A, our first question, but if anyone else has questions, please do drop them in the Q&A portion of the webinar screen. I want to start us off with looking forward. So you both highlighted the complexity of both drone delivery and passenger delivery, and just that, I think, Matt, you put it that you don't snap your fingers and we're just turn something on and off in a single city, right? There's a lot of steps that need to happen, both technology and then Gabriela, as you highlighted, logistically as well from the city regulation perspective and all of these foreseen and unforeseen consequences. So thinking about the goals that these services, both delivery and passenger, aim to provide, one of the challenges I think is often raised is scalability, right? And thinking about if you're going to achieve these broad goals of congestion relief and delivering millions of packages, et cetera, you really need scale. So I'm curious what you both see as that kind of the future view for this in terms of what's the most reasonable use case for these? What do you think the most reasonable price points are for person and goods delivery? And really, what are the volumes we might expect to see from either of these? Estimates, of course.
I think Matt wants me to go first. I think, we can look at New York City as an example. They have replaced their helicopter service from JFK to, I believe it's downtown Manhattan, with eVTOLs. And so it's definitely a luxury, price point for people who can afford to helicopter from JFK to Lower Manhattan. I don't know the specifics of kind of their volume and kind of, their operations, but, I think the entryway would be replacing existing helicopter routes because a lot of the infrastructure might be there. I think it's also very location specific because, for example, we have regulations that New York doesn't have. We have CEQA. We also have a very different climate than New York. We have considerations of high extreme heat that would impact the type of fuel required, or that the type of fuel that the eVTOLs use. If you're putting a vertiport on the top of a skyscraper in the valley, the temperature up there is 115, and if you have hydrogen, it's very volatile. So that's a big concern of how do we keep that safe. We also have, the need to electrify if they're running on electricity, and how do you power that? How do you get the power grid stable enough when we have brownouts throughout the rest of the city, when it becomes really hot? So, I think it's hard to say what would come online first. I think it really depends on what you have already in place and how much the infrastructure might lend itself in order to kind of propel the timeline forward. So, and I think too, in Matt's example, the drone use case also depends on your geography because, in an urban environment, we don't have driveways large enough like the ones in the video shown to allow for that drop. It might be something more of a locker, that we would establish at maybe a community center or a rec center where it's like a communal drop-off point. I don't know. These are kind of the things that the OEMs should be able to kind of think about more creatively and bring forward, how we could ease into it a little better.
No, that's a great point on the space you need to make this stuff work. Like, I think a lot of the people behind commercial drone delivery services realized relatively quickly that it was going to be a really hard sell in urban areas. Like, what do you do with drone delivery in Manhattan, right? We see all those glossy videos of firing a package into a spacious driveway. It very much looks like a suburban or quasi-rural experiment for the near future. But to your scalability question, Ann, like, I think the companies haven't tipped their price points on what delivery looks like. Everybody's in kind of go get new customers mode, so things are free or they're pretty close to comped, right? But all indications suggest this is going to be a luxury good. And just for my own curiosity going into this, like I was trying to figure out like how much work Amazon's drone fleet would have to do to replace its delivery trucks, and the ratio is about 25 drones going flat out all day through the daylight hours for every one truck, right? And every warehouse Amazon delivers from, most warehouses, you've got hundreds of trucks, right? So for this to be a meaningful thing, even for this just one company, for the Amazon example, they're going to have a ton of drones out there. So all signs point to it being kind of a niche or a luxury thing for really the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point in thinking about where are these projected to be versus where is the the scale of impact, which is really the urban areas, and what might be the mismatch between those two pieces. I saw a projection from eVair Mobility from a few years ago, projecting, for example, 200 urban air mobilities with 90 routes and 30 stations in Miami. Kind of to your point, Matt, I did a little bit of digging and asked, well, what are they currently being served by transit? And there's about 1,300 transit vehicles in the same city. So again, thinking about that scale comparison is quite interesting. And then how does that then translate to price? So sounds like from both of you, still lots of uncertainty in this space, certainly. We do have a few other questions coming in the chat and the Q&A, but I want to ask you one other broad question, which is, again, as you've both laid out a variety of uncertainties with both of these passenger and delivery modes, how would you suggest that cities really start to approach that? Is it acknowledging that uncertainty and scenario planning? Is it just taking a back seat? What would you recommend in this uncertain space?
I can say that for our city, we're really about listening and learning. We are not trying to be the first ones. We prefer to watch and learn and, be able to see applications so that we can figure out, how to structure it for ourselves in the best way possible. I think we're in the moment of really being thoughtful about this, simply because in the past, our city in particular has seen so much community disruption by transportation and aviation planning decisions. We've had communities bifurcated due to freeways, has created environmental injustice. And so, we're still trying to kind of equate services in the way that, creates quality of life equitably across our city. And so for that reason, we're trying to learn from mistakes of the past to be able to implement something new entirely, with eyes wide open and, not recreate those circumstances. I think we're really open to seeing, how other cities that have the same issues that we do move forward. I'm really curious to see if it expands in New York City. I think we're all very eager to see other case studies to be able to learn from those operations. But out of the gate, I think we're not as ready to we're still understanding so much that as we learn a little bit more, we learn that we need more to learn. There's more to learn here.
And I'd say advice is way above my pay grade as a reporter, but a couple observations from looking at this the last few years. Well, one is just for municipalities to be aware of the kind of power imbalance that can come when a big tech, because a lot of these innovations are coming out of big tech. When a big tech partner comes calling, like oftentimes the assumption on the civic level is, oh, they want to work with us in partnership and do some bespoke thing, when really you're being offered a cookie cutter, kind of take it or leave it, right? You see this kind of across infrastructure that big corporate America tends to want to plant in cities, right? And so it's important to be kind of realistic about what you can do in talks with whatever partner you're working with, right? Because they might have an idea that you are kind of a constituency to be managed, not a partner to be worked with, depending on who you're sitting across the table from. And the other, I know this will sound ridiculous after saying that some of this remains pretty far off, but I mean, I think that the scooter example Gabriela raised is an enlightening one, that like sometimes when things do show up and the growth goes up and to the right, they can be faster than you anticipated. So when and if things get the green light, like you should expect them, you should be prepared for, oh goodness, what happens if this just explodes overnight and suddenly these things are everywhere and buzzing at all hours, right? Kind of at the high end of the expectations.
Yeah, and just kind of Matt, to sort of elaborate on that point, I think it's really key for jurisdictions to be in the conversation and to be listening, right? And just kind of thinking about this, because I agree with you that when it goes, it's going to go fast. And so really taking the opportunity that we have now to think through these things, like doing the homework ahead of the ballot is really key. So that we can be responsive. I mean, I don't think it's a secret to know that government is slow. So it's challenging to get through our process. And so as much front loading that we can do to prepare for when the moment hits, it really just does behoove us all to have a lot of that under our belt. We don't have to have, a definitive position or stance on all of these different pieces, but it's about staying informed and knowing where we are in the conversation so that we're ready. And, the world is at a point where you cannot, uh, you know, dismiss any possibility anymore. We're in a whole new level, and so it just seems like good planning to just hear and be in the conversation so that when it's up, we're able to be a little faster at pivoting and accommodating something.
So another question coming from James in the chat is thinking about the labor side of this as well. So thinking about these as new systems, what do you all, in the work you've done, have you seen on the labor side, thinking about what do cities really need? They need to support this? Things like remote pilots, coders, regulators, inspectors. Can you touch on those dimensions as well?
Yeah, I think there's, a lot of new positions, probably new technology titles and things that will have to come online. We do promote in our city this transition. It's a just transition where positions that are potentially being phased out because of technology are retrained to be integrated into the new technology. That's something that is a priority for the city, and it does help us maintain our different diversity populations, our different income levels. It's part of what makes LA, and having all these different levels of positions and carry forward in labor is really key, and it makes for a healthy economy. And so, I think the more proactive that OEMs can be in pulling forward those opportunities, the more supportive cities can be to support, moving into this new technology.
I'd love to get smarter on just how many people these programs employ and just what capacity. Because on one hand, you've got obviously these are physical things launching from a vertiport or a warehouse somewhere, and so there's going to be people who maintain them in person. But it makes me wonder where you sit those remote pilots, and I'm not sure we've seen kind of what the models look like for that. But something to be cautious about is where those jobs are going to sit. Is it going to be some bullpen somewhere, or is it going to be something that's realistically kind of co-located with the operation itself?
Yeah. Another dimension is thinking about how the cities could re-envision these services within their existing operations or land uses, for example. So Alex has a question about how a city might envision processes for integrating urban air mobility activities into the zoning code or land use permissions, right? Thinking about all the places they need to fuel, land. There's airspace is separate from ground space. Gabriela, perhaps you can start on that one, and then Matt, of course, chime in as well.
Yeah, I think this is the area where it's going to be like all of the different agencies kind of coming together to really establish the regulation boundaries of where do aviation regulations end and where does land use begin. It is to some degree clear, but then there's also I've seen some different proposals that really stretch what we know in terms of those boundaries of jurisdiction. So I think there are certain aspects of land use regulation that we could probably, think about regulating zones that permit vertiports by right versus those that would have to go through an entitlement process of additional review. But also, I think environmentally, there would be a number of studies. And again, the conversation with the state with regard to CEQA and potentially having additional requirements in CEQA at the state level. If those don't, resonate at the state level, they may be those special studies that we require from the city alone, regarding, vibration studies and that kind of thing. Depending on where they're located, wildlife studies may be needed, migration patterns, that kind of thing. It really just, depends on so many conversations that we still need to get to in order to be able to really kind of carve this path forward. I think it's also like this tricky space of like, well, we're waiting on the federal government and we're waiting on the state. We're waiting, everybody's kind of waiting a little bit, but it's also, I think where when push comes to shove, like we'll get there. It's just that, spending taxpayer money on something that hasn't been established, before the need is truly established is difficult to make the case for, not necessarily from a department standpoint, but I think electeds in particular would not be able to direct, staff to use that money and resource until there's a proven need. So there's just kind of a lot of pieces that would need to align in order for us to really kind of hone down on where, who pushes this forward first. I know that's like a really complicated answer, but it's also a very complicated, introduction into this new world.
No, that's well said. Not much to add here.
Thanks to you both. So another question from John in the Q&A is around safety, right? And so there's a lot of questions around urban air mobility and safety. John mentions in the chat questions around, for example, thinking about regulation, all the many modes that are happening in the skies at the moment, the questions in general, I think, around air safety these days. But there's also these other pieces that we could consider, things like within the vehicle, people feeling safe or unsafe sharing a vehicle with each other. Could these vehicles be autonomous? Say if the passenger one specifically, again, what is people's comfort level and what is the safety of those perceived and real? And so could you both speak to either the delivery or passenger side, thinking about the safety of the operations, as well as, say, people's willingness to use or share these devices in the long term?
I think maybe the less consequential side of that first, which is, partial delivery. There's not lives at risk hovering above a city. But I would just to stick up for what's at stake there. Like they could still kill the industry if delivery drones start falling out of the sky with big heavy lithium batteries and they make a fire that's hard to put out, right? Like that's a nightmare proposition. That's part of why the engineering standards for these things are so high and why people are putting them through their paces and why companies like Amazon are saying, hang on, once we encounter issues, we're going to stop the fleet entirely because the risks of just tarnishing the industry, even if you're not killing anyone necessarily, like there's a whole lot of other ancillary reputational things that can skunk up the works.
Yeah, the safety conversation is really large. There's so many parts of it. There's the people safety part of it and just them being in the vehicle. But the infrastructure itself, I kind of alluded to it a little bit in having a vertiport, in a very high extreme heat location and the fuel opportunities that would need to be ensured are safe to maintain in those, extreme temperatures. there's also just kind of having this, emergency response coordination of when something goes wrong. And it may not be the eVTOL that is the problem in the sky. It could be other flights. It could be, weather. We don't know. Like, it could be fireworks that are part of a civil unrest. I mean, that's very much part of urban life. And so, having a really solidly coordinated emergency coordination and across agencies that haven't done that before is a big lift. And I think, all of that needs to be in place in order for us to be able to safely move forward and also ensure, when you're flying in, when you're going to have at least that amount of safety. And I think, depending on the size, you may not have a lot of, strangers in there with you. I think that the size of these vehicles will also kind of help with that particular aspect of this modality. So
Another question coming from Caleb in the Q&A is thinking about the role of airports. And Matt, I know you also mentioned, say, warehouses. So can both of you talk about, say, the big infrastructure or the role that airports could play, or maybe from the delivery side, do airports have a role, or is it more, say, a point-to-point base outside of the airport space?
On the warehouse side, or on the parcel delivery side, it's probably outside of airports for now, if only for the air traffic control headache of, like, you're sending vehicles with different purposes from the same spot and occupying congested airspace. Like all the initiatives that I've seen so far and all the pilots suggest that if we're doing parcel delivery, it's probably going to be outside of at least big old mainstream airports.
yeah, I think that there's some school of thought out there that believe one of the first sort of passenger movement routes will be airport to airport. I think there's more regulations, that govern airports, and the federal government has a lot more of say in those opportunities because most airports get funded by federal funds, and so when you get money from the federal government, you have to have, you have to adhere to all their regulations. So, I think there's a lot of consideration in terms of airport design. You have to think about how much space an airport has to expand to accommodate these. Just having space for a vertiport isn't enough. You have to think about, forgive me, I'm forgetting on the technical, but it's basically the impacts of downwind and the size of the planes that you're competing with in the same airspace along the routes for landing and departure. And, a vertiport could mess that up. I mean, we're already seeing some of that with regular airplanes that are not, like pilot programs. They're like real jets, real planes that are having these issues, and air traffic control, right? There's a lot of those issues. And so, I think being able to have that assurance on the safety end as well is going to be high on the list.
And with only 3 minutes left, I'm going to ask a final wrap-up question, which is, both of you have alluded to the fact that there have been a range of technologies that have come through our cities. I'm sure urban air mobility will not be the last. And so what are the lessons that cities or regulators or interested parties in general can draw from urban mobility, but looking forward and maybe to other technologies? Are there broad lessons that we can think about how to approach new technologies, whether it be focusing on our goals and implementing policy from there? Is it harnessing technology as quickly as possible, right? What are the broad lessons that you think can be drawn from what you both have observed over the past few years with urban air mobility?
I think as we're seeing sort of government really shift, cities, local jurisdictions are kind of moving to having to be more independent of state and federal resources. And so when we're thinking about new technology advancement, something that I think comes at the top of the list there is about what public benefits we're gaining from this advanced technology. Along the lines of what problem are you solving? What are our stakeholders benefiting from incorporating this? And, you know, presenting your new advanced technology opportunities in the vein of what those benefits are to the community you're looking to go into is always a big sell. I think when you're able to not just show that it's an economic benefit, but it's benefiting in so many other ways, it becomes an easier sell, especially for an elected that's looking to support clean air initiatives, green technology, economic growth. You know, if you can check wins across the board, it's much easier to get, you know, support across your, your council to get the technology and embrace it in a more welcoming way.
One of the things I've seen play out over and over again is the notion kind of sold by technology developers that this is a race, and listen, your city, municipality, state needs to get in there first, and if you don't get in there first, we're going to go to the city next door, right? If these things are big enough and universally applicable enough and successful enough, they're probably going to hit your town at some point, right? And if this is really the future, then we're all going to be flying around in flying taxis, or none of us are, right? So it's just, I think it's there's probably a lot of lessons out there suggesting that's worth taking a thoughtful approach, right? You don't need to jump in with both feet. It's not going to be the case that this is your only opportunity to get a flying thing buzzing around. This is a trend. It's going to be real and it's going to be durable, but it's not the kind of thing where you need to wind up in an economic development bake-off with your neighbors.
That is a perfect place to end on, right on the hour. So Gabriela and Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to everyone else for joining our webinar as well. I will drop in the chat one last time a link to the Urbanism Next report that you can read more on these topics, as well as a place to register for our upcoming webinars. So thanks again all for joining us, and take care.